to ask yourself a very simple question. How much of your peace are you willing to sacrifice just to be accepted by someone else? You may not realize it at first, but every time you silence your feelings to avoid an argument, every time you pretend something does not hurt you because you are afraid someone might leave, every time you say yes, when everything inside you is screaming no, you are teaching yourself that someone else's comfort is more important than your own well-being. And the more often you repeat this pattern, the easier it becomes to forget that your peace has value. You were not placed on this earth to spend your entire life managing the emotions, expectations, opinions, and reactions of other people. There will always be someone who misunderstands you. There will always be someone who wants more from you than you are willing to give. There will always be someone who becomes disappointed when you finally decide to choose yourself. That does not automatically mean you are wrong. Sometimes another person's disappointment is simply the price of your freedom. Think about how much energy is wasted trying to control what other people think. You replay conversations in your mind. You wonder whether you said the right thing. You worry about whether someone is upset with you. You check whether they have changed their attitude toward you. You try to explain yourself again and again, hoping that if you can just find the perfect words, they will finally understand. But peace begins when you understand that you do not have to be understood by everyone in order to be at peace with yourself. There is tremendous power in becoming comfortable with your own decisions. When you know that your intentions are honest and your actions are aligned with what you truly believe, you no longer need constant approval. You can listen to criticism without allowing it to define you. You can hear someone's opinion without immediately changing yourself to satisfy them. You can allow someone to misunderstand you without running after them with explanations. This is not arrogance. It is emotional freedom. Many people confuse peace with the absence of problems. But peace does not mean that life becomes perfectly quiet. Peace means that even when life becomes noisy, you do not allow every noise to enter your mind. You learn what deserves your attention and what does not. You learn that not every argument deserves your response. Not every accusation deserves your defense. And not every person deserves access to your emotional energy. Your attention is one of the most valuable things you possess. Wherever you place it, your life begins to move in that direction. If you constantly place your attention on people who criticize you, your mind becomes filled with criticism. If you constantly focus on people who disrespect you, your emotional world becomes organized around their behavior. But when you begin turning your attention back toward yourself, something changes. You begin asking different questions. What do I need? What do I believe? What kind of life do I want to create? What kind of people bring peace into my life? What am I tolerating that I no longer need to tolerate? And perhaps the most important question is this: why am I afraid to walk away from what continually disturbs me? Sometimes you remain in a situation because you are afraid of being alone. Sometimes you remain because of history. Sometimes you remain because you remember the good moments and hope they will return. Sometimes you remain because you have invested so much time that leaving feels like admitting that the investment was wasted, but your past investment does not require you to sacrifice your future peace. You are allowed to recognize that something once mattered to you and still decide that it no longer belongs in your life. There is a quiet strength in refusing to abandon yourself. You do not need to become cold. You do not need to stop loving people. You do not need to become bitter or distant from the world. You simply need to stop making yourself smaller so that others can remain comfortable around you. Let your kindness exist without becoming self-neglect. Let your compassion exist without becoming self-destruction. Let your love exist without requiring you to tolerate everything. The moment you stop begging for approval, you begin to discover a different kind of confidence. It is not loud. It does not need to prove itself. It simply knows. It knows that being rejected by someone does not make you worthless. It knows that losing a relationship does not mean losing yourself. It knows that walking away from chaos can be an act of courage. It knows that sometimes the greatest form of self-respect is simply saying, I cannot continue living at the cost of my own peace, and then choosing distance without hatred, without revenge, and without the desperate need to make everyone understand your decision. There is a great difference between knowing your worth and waiting for someone else to confirm it. So many people spend years looking outside themselves for evidence that they are valuable. They wait for someone to choose them, praise them, appreciate them, understand them, or tell them that they are enough. And without realizing it, They hand the responsibility for their self-worth to people who may not even understand their own worth. Then, when someone ignores them, rejects them, criticizes them, or walks away, they begin questioning everything about themselves. They think, perhaps I was not good enough, perhaps I should have been different, perhaps if I had tried harder, loved harder, given more, or changed myself, things would have turned out differently. But your value cannot depend upon the changing opinions of another human being. Imagine carrying a priceless object into a room where nobody understands its value. Would that object suddenly become worthless because the people in the room failed to recognize it? Of course not. Their inability to see its value does not alter what it is. And the same principle applies to you. Someone's inability to appreciate your heart does not make your heart less valuable. Someone's inability to recognize your loyalty does not make your loyalty meaningless. Someone's rejection does not become a final judgment on your existence. It is simply their perception, their preference, their limitation, or their choice. The trouble begins when you start negotiating with yourself, because someone else has failed to appreciate you. You begin changing your personality, hiding your opinions, suppressing your dreams, and becoming whatever you believe another person wants. You may even become exhausted from constantly performing a version of yourself that you think will finally earn love and acceptance. But there is no peace in living as an imitation of what someone else expects. You can receive attention that way, perhaps. You can receive temporary approval. You can even convince someone to stay for a while. But deep inside, you know that they are responding to a version of you that is not completely real. Real self-worth begins when you stop asking, "What must I become so that they will value me?" and start asking, "Who am I when I no longer need to convince anyone?" That question changes everything. It brings you back to yourself. You begin recognizing your qualities without needing an audience. You begin appreciating your own progress even when nobody applauds. You begin respecting your own boundaries even when someone calls you difficult. You begin trusting your decisions even when others disagree. There will be seasons when people do not recognize what you bring into their lives. Let them. You cannot force someone to see what they are unwilling to see. You cannot explain your value into another person's consciousness. You cannot argue someone into appreciating you. And the more desperately you try, the more power you give them over your emotional state. Instead, allow their perception to remain theirs while you continue building your relationship with yourself. This does not mean believing that you are perfect. Knowing your worth does not mean refusing to acknowledge your weaknesses. In fact, genuine self-respect allows you to look honestly at yourself without hatred. You can admit that you made mistakes without deciding that you are a mistake. You can recognize where you need to grow without calling yourself worthless. You can accept your imperfections while continuing to improve. There is no contradiction between humility and self-worth. You can remain humble while refusing to disrespect yourself. The world will constantly give you opportunities to forget who you are. Someone will compare you with another person. Someone will tell you that you are behind. Someone will make you feel replaceable. Someone will point toward everything you have not achieved and ignore everything you have overcome. If you accept every outside judgment as truth, your identity will become unstable. You will rise when people praise you and collapse when they criticize you. But when your sense of worth comes from within, you become steadier. Praise becomes pleasant rather than necessary. Criticism becomes information rather than destruction. You begin to understand that you do not need to prove that you deserve respect. You simply begin behaving as someone who respects himself. You stop chasing people who repeatedly show you that they do not want to meet you halfway. You stop over-explaining your boundaries. You stop apologizing for having needs. You stop feeling guilty because you require honesty, consistency, respect, and peace. You stop measuring your value by how quickly someone responds to your message or how much attention they give you. And slowly, something beautiful happens. You become less desperate to be chosen because you have already chosen yourself. You become less afraid of rejection because you understand that rejection does not define your worth. You become less attached to proving your goodness because you know the person you are becoming. You begin walking through life with a quieter confidence, knowing that your value existed before anyone noticed it, before anyone praised it, before anyone loved it, and before anyone decided to stay, allowing yourself to stand firmly in that understanding, even when the world around you refuses to validate it. One of the most difficult lessons in life is understanding that letting go does not always mean that you have lost something valuable. Sometimes, Letting go is the moment you finally stop losing yourself. We become deeply attached to people, relationships, expectations, and memories because we believe that holding on proves love. We think that if we truly care, we must continue trying no matter how much it hurts. We convince ourselves that one more conversation, one more chance, one more sacrifice, or one more effort will somehow change everything. But there comes a point when holding on is no longer an expression of love. It becomes an expression of fear. You may be afraid of losing someone because you have connected your identity to their presence. You may have become so accustomed to their voice, their attention, their approval, or their place in your daily life that imagining life without them feels impossible. But you must remember that before they entered your life, you existed. You had dreams, thoughts, possibilities, and a path of your own. Somewhere along the way, perhaps you began placing so much of yourself into another person that you forgot how to stand emotionally without them. Detachment is the process of returning to yourself. Detachment does not mean becoming heartless. It does not mean pretending that you never cared. It does not mean shutting down your emotions and acting as though nothing can hurt you. Real detachment is much deeper than that. It means accepting reality without trying to force it into the shape you desire. It means allowing people to be who they are, instead of exhausting yourself, trying to turn them into who you need them to be. It means seeing their actions clearly, rather than constantly creating excuses, because you are attached to the idea of who they could become. How much suffering is created by resisting what is already happening? Someone shows you repeatedly that they do not value your presence, yet you continue trying to prove that you are worth keeping. Someone becomes distant, and instead of accepting the distance, you chase after an explanation that will make the pain disappear. Someone changes, and you keep demanding that they return to the person they once were. But people change, circumstances change, feelings change, and one of the greatest forms of freedom is realizing that you do not have to control what changes in order to survive it. When you detach, you stop making another person's behavior the center of your emotional universe. If they stay, you do not lose yourself in them. If they leave, you do not lose yourself without them. You can love without possession. You can care without control. You can appreciate someone's presence without making your entire peace dependent upon their decision to remain. That is a powerful form of love because it is not built upon desperation. There are people you will love deeply who are still not meant to remain in your life forever. This can be painful to accept because we often measure the value of a relationship by its duration. We assume that if something ended, then it must have failed. But not everything that ends is a failure. Some people arrive to teach you something. Some relationships reveal the parts of yourself that still need healing. Some experiences show you what you deserve by first showing you what you should never accept again. Their departure does not erase the meaning of what happened. You do not have to hate someone in order to let them go. You do not need revenge to move forward. You do not need to convince them that they made a mistake. Let them have their version of the story. Let them believe what they choose to believe. You know how exhausting it is to spend your life trying to control another person's understanding of you. Sometimes peace arrives when you stop fighting, to be remembered correctly by people who have already decided how they want to see you. Detachment asks you to release the need for certain outcomes. You may want someone to apologize. You may want them to regret what they did. You may want them to finally understand your pain and recognize everything you gave. But your healing cannot remain dependent upon something another person may never give you. If you wait for their apology before allowing yourself to move on, you have placed the key to your freedom in their hands. Take it back. Heal because you deserve healing, not because they finally acknowledge the wound. There is strength in allowing silence to replace endless explanations. There is strength in allowing distance to answer questions that words cannot answer. There is strength in accepting that closure is not always something another person gives you. Sometimes it is a decision you make within yourself when you finally stop returning to a door that has already shown you it will not open. You begin to understand that your life does not end because someone chooses another path. And as you release the need to hold on to what is slipping away, you begin to feel the space inside you again. The energy once spent chasing, worrying, waiting, and wondering slowly returns to you. You remember what it feels like to wake up without immediately thinking about someone else's choices. You remember that your future is still waiting for you, that your identity is larger than one relationship, and that your heart can remain open without remaining attached to what repeatedly takes away your peace. allowing you to walk forward with love in your heart, while finally keeping your soul in your own hands. You teach people how to treat you through what you repeatedly allow into your life. This does not mean that you can control every person's behavior, because you cannot. People will always make their own choices, and some will choose kindness while others choose disrespect. But you can decide what you will participate in, what you will tolerate, and how long you will remain in situations that continuously disturb your peace. This is where boundaries become so important. A boundary is not a wall built to keep the entire world away from you. It is a clear understanding of where you end and another person begins, what belongs to you and what belongs to them, what you are responsible for and what you are not responsible for. Many people struggle with boundaries because they have been taught to confuse kindness with constant availability. They believe being a good person means always answering, always helping, always forgiving, always explaining, and always making themselves available whenever someone needs something. But there is a difference between generosity and self-abandonment. You can be kind without giving everyone unlimited access to your time. You can be compassionate without carrying another person's emotional burdens. You can love someone without allowing them to repeatedly cross lines that destroy your sense of peace. Sometimes the hardest word to say is simply no. You may worry that someone will think you are selfish. You may fear disappointing them. You may be afraid that they will become angry or distant. So you cess while everything inside you says no. Then you become resentful, exhausted, and emotionally drained. The problem is not always that you have too much responsibility. Sometimes the problem is that you have never given yourself permission to refuse what is unhealthy for you. A boundary can be as simple as saying, "I cannot do that," without creating a long explanation afterward. You do not need to produce a courtroom defense every time you make a decision about your own life. Your time belongs to you. Your attention belongs to you. Your energy belongs to you. You are allowed to decide where those things go. When you constantly explain your boundaries to people who have already decided not to respect them, you can spend more energy defending your decision than you would have spent simply maintaining it. There will be people who call you difficult when you stop being convenient. There will be people who say that you have changed when you stop accepting the behavior they once received from you without consequences. They may accuse you of becoming cold, distant, selfish, or arrogant. But sometimes you have not become worse. You have simply become clearer. The version of you that tolerated everything may have been easier for them to deal with, but that does not mean it was healthier for you. You must learn to recognize the difference between guilt and responsibility. Feeling guilty does not always mean that you have done something wrong. Sometimes guilt appears because you are doing something unfamiliar. If you have spent years putting everyone else first, choosing yourself may initially feel selfish. If you have spent years avoiding confrontation, speaking honestly may feel uncomfortable. If you have spent years accepting disrespect, walking away may feel cruel. But discomfort is not proof that you are making the wrong decision. Sometimes discomfort is simply the feeling of breaking an old pattern. Healthy boundaries also require consistency. It is not enough to tell someone that certain behavior is unacceptable and then continue rewarding that behavior with your attention. If you say you need space, take the space. If you say you will not participate in disrespectful conversations, leave the conversation when disrespect begins. If you say you are no longer available for something, do not repeatedly make exceptions because you are afraid of someone's reaction. Every time you honor your own boundary, you strengthen your relationship with yourself. This does not mean becoming rigid or refusing to compromise. Healthy relationships require flexibility, understanding, forgiveness, and communication. But compromise should not require you to betray your fundamental values. There is a difference between meeting someone halfway and walking the entire distance while they remain standing still. There is a difference between forgiveness and giving someone unlimited opportunities to hurt you. There is a difference between understanding someone's struggles and allowing their struggles to become an excuse for mistreating you. Your peace becomes easier to protect when you stop trying to convince everyone to respect you. Some people will understand your boundaries immediately. Others will test them. And a few may become angry simply because they no longer have the access they once had. Let their reaction belong to them. You are not responsible for making someone comfortable with a boundary that exists to protect your well-being. The strongest boundaries are often quiet. They do not need dramatic announcements. They are visible through your choices. You stop answering every message immediately. You stop participating in conversations that constantly become arguments. You stop returning to environments that repeatedly make you feel small. You stop explaining personal decisions to people who have not earned that level of access. You stop chasing relationships where respect only appears when you threaten to leave. Slowly, your life becomes less crowded with unnecessary emotional noise. And when you begin protecting your energy, you discover that saying no to what drains you creates space for what strengthens you. You have more time for your goals, more clarity for your decisions, more patience for the people who genuinely care about you, and more energy to build the life you actually want. You begin realizing that every boundary is not merely a restriction placed upon someone else. It is a promise you make to yourself that your time, your attention, your dignity, and your peace will no longer be treated as things that can be taken from you without your permission. There will always be something outside of you trying to convince you that you need more in order to finally be at peace. More money, more attention, more recognition, more success, more approval, more possessions, more affection, more proof that you have become important in the eyes of the world. And because these things can feel good, you may begin believing that happiness exists somewhere in the future, after you achieve the next goal, after someone finally appreciates you, after the relationship becomes what you imagined, after people finally understand your value. But if your peace is always waiting for the next condition to be fulfilled, then peace will always remain somewhere beyond your reach. Temporary satisfaction can be very convincing. It can give you a sudden feeling of excitement and make you that you have finally found what you were looking for. Someone gives you attention and suddenly you feel important. Someone praises you and suddenly you feel confident. You achieve something and suddenly you feel worthy. You receive what you wanted, and for a moment the mind becomes quiet. But then another desire appears. Another comparison begins. Another fear enters. Another goal demands your attention, and you discover that what you thought would finally complete you was only another temporary experience. This is why you must learn the difference between pleasure and peace. Pleasure depends heavily upon circumstances. Peace is deeper. Pleasure says, I feel good because something happened the way I wanted. Peace says, even when things do not happen exactly as I wanted, I can remain connected to myself. Pleasure is not wrong. There is nothing wrong with enjoying success, love, recognition, comfort, or beautiful experiences. The problem begins when you make those things responsible for your emotional stability. You can enjoy someone without needing them to complete you. You can appreciate success without using it as proof that you matter. You can desire wealth without believing that money will finally make you worthy. You can love deeply without turning another person's presence into the foundation of your identity. This is where real freedom begins, because you stop demanding that the outside world give you something that can only be cultivated within. Sometimes you have to walk away from what looks attractive because you recognize what it costs you internally. A relationship may look perfect from the outside while quietly destroying your peace. A position may bring status while leaving you emotionally empty. A friendship may have history while constantly exhausting you. A lifestyle may impress people while requiring you to live under pressure every day. The question is not simply, what am I gaining? You must also ask, what is this costing me? There are things that appear valuable because everyone else wants them, but popularity does not make something right for you. The world may tell you to hold on because everyone fears losing what you have. But sometimes losing something externally is exactly what allows you to regain something internally. You may lose a relationship and gain your peace. You may lose approval and gain your authenticity. You may lose an opportunity and gain time to discover a better direction. You may lose an identity that no longer fits you and finally gain the freedom to become someone new. Inner freedom means you no longer need every situation to go your way before you allow yourself to breathe. You stop living in constant negotiation with reality. You understand that some doors will close, some people will leave, some plans will fail, some dreams will change. Some things you desperately wanted will never become yours. And instead of treating every disappointment as evidence that life is against you, you begin seeing it as part of the movement of life itself. You become less afraid of losing, because you understand that not everything you lose is meant to be recovered. Sometimes the greatest mistake is chasing something simply because you once wanted it. You may continue pursuing a person who has clearly moved on. You may continue forcing a career that no longer fits your values. You may continue maintaining an image of yourself that requires constant exhaustion. You may continue defending a version of your life simply because you are afraid to admit that you have outgrown it. But you are allowed to change your mind. You are allowed to choose a quieter life. You are allowed to stop participating in competitions that never interested you. You are allowed to define success differently. You are allowed to want peace more than attention. You are allowed to value meaningful relationships over impressive ones. You are allowed to prefer a life that feels good internally over a life that looks impressive externally. And once you understand this, you stop chasing every temporary reward that appears in front of you. You become more selective about where you place your energy. You begin noticing which people leave you feeling expanded and which ones leave you feeling diminished. You notice which goals genuinely belong to you and which ones were inherited from other people's expectations. You begin creating a life based not on what receives the most applause, but on what allows you to remain honest with yourself. The greatest freedom is not having everything you want. It is reaching a point where you no longer need everything to be exactly as you want before you can feel whole. You can desire without desperation. You can love without possession. You can succeed without arrogance. You can lose without believing that you are ruined. You can walk away without needing revenge. You can begin again without considering the past a failure. And you can finally understand that your peace is not a reward you receive after life becomes perfect. It is something you protect while life continues changing around you, choosing again and again not to trade your inner freedom for temporary approval, temporary pleasure, temporary attention, or anything else that requires you to abandon the person you are becoming.